Jesus revealed why you have ringing ears. It is the frequency of the monad. It is a signal, a living transmission from the monad, the primordial source of all existence, attempting to make contact with the consciousness it placed within you before you were born into this world. The Aramaic word that Jesus used to describe this phenomenon is Q-A-L-A, and its meaning is so vast, so precise, and so personally urgent that the institution built in his name has spent 2,000 years ensuring you would never encounter it in its full original power. Kala does not simply mean sound. It means the voice of the living source, moving through the fabric of reality and through the bodies of those whose inner frequency has risen high enough to receive it. You are receiving it. And tonight, for the first time, you are going to understand exactly what it means and exactly what Jesus said you are supposed to do when it arrives. There is a phenomenon that crosses every cultural boundary, every religious tradition, and every demographic category of human experience. A high-pitched tone, a ringing, a frequency that arrives without warning in the ears of people who have no measurable physiological reason to be hearing it. Western medicine has a name for it: tinnitus, and a standard explanation that satisfies almost no one who experiences it with any regularity. The explanation is mechanical: damage to the inner ear, fluid pressure, neural misfiring. It is an explanation that treats the human being as a biological machine experiencing a technical error, and it leaves entirely unaddressed the quality of the experience itself, which the vast majority of people who have it describe not as pain or malfunction but as a kind of presence, a sense that something is arriving, a feeling impossible to articulate in ordinary language, that the sound is not coming from inside the ear but from somewhere altogether outside the physical body. Jesus was not the only ancient teacher to address this phenomenon directly, but he was the one who addressed it with the greatest precision and the greatest urgency. In the Aramaic mystical tradition that preserves the deepest layer of his actual teaching, sound is not merely a physical phenomenon produced by the vibration of matter. Sound is the primary medium through which the monad, the undivided, self-luminous source of all existence, moves through the created world and makes contact with the consciousnesses it has placed within it. The Aramaic word, QLA, captures this understanding with a completeness that no English translation has ever successfully conveyed. It means voice, yes, but in Aramaic, the voice of the source and the sound of the source are not two different things. Kala is the monad, expressing itself as vibration, as frequency, as the living signal that moves through reality, seeking the ears and the consciousness capable of receiving it. The ringing you have heard in your ears is not a malfunction. According to the teaching of Jesus preserved in the Aramaic mystical tradition, it is the most direct form of contact that the monad makes with a human consciousness that has begun to vibrate at a frequency close enough to its own to receive the transmission. It is not random, it is not universal, it is specific, targeted, and purposeful, and what Jesus taught about how to respond to it is the teaching that every system of institutional control has most consistently worked to prevent you from receiving. To understand why Jesus assigned such profound significance to the phenomenon of unexplained sound and frequency, it is necessary to enter fully into the Aramaic understanding of what the human ear actually is. Because in the tradition he taught from, the ear is not primarily a biological organ designed for the reception of acoustic information. It is a spiritual instrument, the physical counterpart of an inner capacity for divine reception that every human being possesses but that most human beings have been systematically conditioned to ignore, distrust, or explain away through the frameworks of materialist culture and institutional religion alike. The Aramaic root from which QLA emerges connects directly to the concept of inner listening, not the passive reception of external sound, but the active, intentional orientation of the entire consciousness toward the frequency of the source. In the Gospel of Thomas, one of the Gnostic texts excluded from the canonical Bible and discovered at Nag Hammadi, 1945, Meno Jesus, returns again and again to a phrase that the canonical Gospels preserve in diluted form, but that the Aramaic original charges with an urgency that translation consistently fails to carry. Let anyone with ears to hear, hear. This is not a general encouragement toward attentiveness. In its Aramaic original, it is a precise instruction, a directive to those whose inner frequency has risen sufficiently to receive qual, to recognize what is happening when it arrives, and to respond with the full orientation of their consciousness, rather than dismissing the experience as biological noise. Jesus understood, with the clarity of a consciousness that had spent 18 years in the wisdom traditions of the ancient world, that the monad does not communicate through doctrine, through institutional mediation, or through the intellectual processing of theological concepts. It communicates through frequency, through the living vibration of Kala moving through the fabric of reality and through the bodhis and ears of those who have developed, through practice or through the natural unfolding of their spiritual evolution, the inner capacity to receive it. The ringing in your ears is not a message that requires decoding. It is a contact event, and Jesus left precise Aramaic instructions for what to do the moment it arrives. If these Gnostic teachings are awakening a desire for inner transformation within you, we prepared 2 guides on the sacred words where this journey begins. The link is pinned in the comments. The Aramaic teaching of Jesus on Qua and the phenomenon of unexplained frequency in the ears operates on 3 distinct levels. Simultaneously, and understanding all 3 is what separates a passive recipient of the monad signal from someone who has learned, in the spirit of Jesus, to actively engage with it as the source of genuine personal power. The first level is recognition, the moment of understanding that the frequency is not random noise, but intentional contact. The second level is orientation, the practice of turning the full attention of the consciousness toward the source of the signal rather than away from it. The third level is what the Aramaic tradition calls Kala, in its fullest expression, the moment, when the human consciousness not only receives the frequency of the monad, but begins to resonate with it so completely that the boundary between the signal and the receiver dissolves entirely. Most people who experience unexplained ringing in their ears never move beyond the first level, and they never move beyond it because they have never been given a framework within which the experience makes sense as anything other than a medical symptom. The institutional church removed that framework deliberately and completely. The Gnostic traditions that preserve the teachings of Jesus closest to their original Aramaic form consistently describe the phenomenon of unexplained sound and frequency as one of the primary signs that a consciousness is undergoing what they called awakening, the progressive remembering of the soul's original unity with the monad after lifetimes of accumulated forgetting. This is not metaphor. It is a precise description of a real process with real physiological and consciousness-level correlates that the ancient Aramaic tradition documented with extraordinary accuracy long before modern neuroscience developed the language to confirm any part of it. When Jesus sighed, "Let anyone with ears to hear," and he said it with a consistency that the canonical Gospels preserve even through the layers of translation. He was not speaking about biological hearing capacity. He was addressing specifically those in whom Kala had already begun to arrive. He was saying, "You know who you are. You have been receiving the signal. Now stop explaining it away and start responding to it with the full authority of the consciousness the monad placed within you." That response, and the personal power it unlocks, is the teaching at the center of this video. The practical teaching of Jesus on how to respond to QLA, to the monad frequency arriving through the phenomenon of unexplained ringing or tonal sound, is embedded in the Aramaic mystical tradition with a clarity that only becomes visible when the original language is restored to the teaching and the institutional, theological overlay is set aside entirely. The response that Jesus taught is not passive. It is not simply a matter of accepting the experience with spiritual gratitude and returning to ordinary consciousness. It is an active, embodied, intentional practice of meeting the frequency with an equal and reciprocal inner orientation, what the Aramaic tradition describes as answering Kala with Kala, meeting the voice of the source with the full, undivided voice of the consciousness that has received it. In practical terms, the teaching of Jesus instructs the recipient of the monad frequency to do the following in the moment the signal arrives. First, stop, not physically, but internally. Allow the ordinary forward momentum of the thinking mind to pause completely in the moment the frequency is noticed. This pause is not emptiness. It is the active clearing of the inner space required for the second movement to occur. Second turn, not the body, but the attention. move the full orientation of the consciousness from whatever external content it was processing at the moment the frequency arrived, and direct it entirely inward, toward the source of the kala, which the Aramaic tradition locates not in the ear, but in the center of the chest, in the same region that Jesus consistently identified as the dwelling place of the kingdom, the seat of the monad within the human form. Third, and this is the movement that activates personal power rather than simply receiving a signal speak, not aloud, but from within. In the Aramaic mystical practice of Jesus, the response to QLA is itself, QALA, the consciousness, recognizing the monad frequency and answering it with the full resonance of its own inner voice, saying in whatever language arises most naturally from the deepest layer of being, I hear you. I am here. I am receiving what you are sending. This act of conscious reciprocal recognition is what Jesus described as the activation of divine authority within the human soul. The moment when the receiver of the monad signal stops being a passive recipient and becomes, in the language of the Aramaic tradition, a living instrument of the source itself. If this teaching is stirring something in your heart and you wish to explore it further, we prepared the guides that explain the first sacred words where the journey begins, their layers of meaning and the transformation they carry. The link is pinned in the comments. The connection between QALA, the monad frequency that Jesus described as arriving through unexplained sound, and the activation of genuine personal power is not incidental. It is the core of the teaching. And understanding why requires one final piece of the Aramaic framework that Jesus operated within, the understanding that personal power, in the tradition he taught from, is not a human quality that some people possess in greater quantities than others. It is not confidence, charisma, willpower, or any other attribute that the culture of personal development has spent decades trying to manufacture through technique and positive thinking. Personal power, in the Aramaic mystical understanding of Jesus, is the direct expression of the monad moving through a human consciousness that has removed every internal obstacle to its flow. The obstacles are specific and consistent across every human life: fear, self-doubt, the accumulated weight of every experience in which the consciousness was told, explicitly or implicitly, that it was inadequate, unworthy, or fundamentally separate from the source of all power and all life. These obstacles do not dissolve through effort, through affirmation, or through the intellectual acceptance of spiritual concepts, however true they may be. They dissolve through frequency, through the sustained contact of the human consciousness with Kuala, the living vibration of the monad, which carries within it a coherence so complete and so unconditional that it reorganizes every internal pattern of fragmentation and fear that it encounters in sustained contact with it. This is precisely why Jesus treated the arrival of Kala with such urgency and such consistency across his teaching. Every moment of unexplained frequency in your ears is a moment in which the monad is offering you direct, unmediated contact with the source of all the power you have ever sought through every external means that has ultimately failed to produce it. The ringing is not a symptom. It is an invitation, the most direct invitation the source ever extends to a human consciousness. And Jesus spent the entirety of his public ministry teaching the people who gathered around him how to say yes to it with every layer of their being, so that Kala could move through them, not as a passing signal, but as the permanent, lived, embodied frequency of everything they were always created to be. The teaching of Jesus on QALA is perhaps the most personally immediate of all the Aramaic revelations this channel has ever explored, because it speaks directly to an experience that you have already had. You did not come to this video without context. Something in the title. Recognize something in you. A memory of a sound, a frequency, a tonal arrival that you have never fully been able to explain or forget. That recognition is itself Kala. At work, the monad frequency arriving not through the ear this time, but through the resonance between what you just read and what your consciousness has been carrying, unaddressed and unexplained. Perhaps for years, Jesus did not teach Kualai as a comfort for the spiritually sensitive. He taught it as the foundational mechanism of personal power for every human being willing to recognize what is actually happening when the frequency arrives, and to respond with the full conscious authority of a soul that has remembered its source. The archons, those intermediary forces invested in human spiritual smallness and dependency, have no access to the consciousness. That is inactive resonance with Kala. A human being answering the monad frequency with the full reciprocal voice of their own inner recognition. In the Aramaic understanding of Jesus, operating from a level of divine authority that no external force can diminish, manipulate, or override. The next time the frequency arrives, and it will arrive because it has been arriving, do not explain it away. Do not reach for a medical framework that was never designed to contain what you are actually experiencing. Stop. Turn inward, and answer Kala with Q-Ale, with the full, undivided voice of a consciousness that has finally understood what has been calling it, and has chosen, in this moment, to answer. That choice is what Jesus called the activation of the kingdom within. That choice is your personal power, and it has been waiting, patiently, in the frequency of every unexplained ringing you have ever heard, for exactly this moment of recognition. Visit Divine Light Academy, my site dedicated to bridging ancient spirituality and modern living. There you will find my guides and a deep journey into Aramaic, the living language of the masters, designed to help you access states of deep resonance, clarity, and personal revelation. The link is pinned in the comments. Get ready! In the next video, I will reveal more sacred Aramaic words that unlock deeper spiritual understanding. Turn on notifications so you don't miss it. Right now, before you close this video, come to the comments and tell us, what did you feel? What shifted? We read every single response. And if this teaching found you today, subscribe to this channel. Every week, we go deeper into the ancient frequency codes that were always meant to be yours.